This is Between the Brackets, a MediaWiki podcast, episode 5, April 3rd, 2018. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren. My guest for this episode is Brian Wolff, a developer who works in the security group for the Wikimedia Foundation. I last saw him just about a week ago when we both attended the Enterprise MediaWiki Conference, or EMWCon, in Houston, Texas. Hi, Brian. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Good to be here.
Great. Where do you live, Brian?
I live in Montreal.
For most people, they first got into MediaWiki through Wikipedia, but in your case, from what I understand, it was actually a related site called Wikinews, where wiki pages are articles about current events. Most people haven't heard of it at this point, though I think it used to be a bigger deal than it is now, at least in the Wikimedia world. When did you start getting involved in Wikinews, and what attracted you to that site specifically?
That would have been around 2005, I think. Yeah. At the time, it just seemed like a kind of smaller version of Wikipedia, where I could be more useful than at Wikipedia, where it seemed like all the things were kind of already being done. It was kind of, I don't know, I would be in high school at the time, and it was kind of like, the page where people say Wikipedia is like a video game? It was kind of like that.
Right, interesting. This is like a video game with fewer users that you can get away with more things or do more things in.
Yeah.
Do you still read Wikinews at all?
Not really, no. The project's seen better days, let's say.
Sure, that's fair. So right around that time, were you also sort of, to be a little poetic, finding yourself as a programmer?
Yeah, well, at that time was probably before I knew how to program, actually.
Oh, okay.
Originally, I actually learned JavaScript to add little things to the site JavaScript of Wikinews. That was one of the main reasons I did learn JavaScript. So yeah, it was kind of instrumental in bringing me to where I am today.
Oh, that's interesting. So what kind of JavaScript scripts were you writing for Wikinews?
Very, very simple things. Like, it was a thing to put the login box for the web chat version of IRC into a page. There was one thing that's kind of, actually in some ways, like something you could do with page forms, but it was a very small little form thing for the page where you could review an article and put ratings, and then it would edit the wiki text to reflect what you changed.
Oh, nice.
Kind of that sort of thing, all very small, kind of little helper scripts.
Yeah, okay. As I understand it, your real introduction to MediaWiki programming came when you participated in the 2010 Google Summer of Code in a project to, and I quote, improve metadata support for uploaded media in MediaWiki. If you don't mind, could you explain what the Google Summer of Code is and why you decided to get involved?
Yeah, so that was in about 2010. So in Google Summer of Code is a program where Google funds various open source projects to kind of have interns. You get about $5,000 for the summer, which at the time was quite a lot of money for me as a university student. You have to be in university and kind of just go this summer and add a feature to open source platform. In my case, MediaWiki was participating. I had done a little bit of dev stuff before that, but not very much. And it seemed like a good way to get my foot in the door, so to speak, and it was, and I had a great summer, and I worked a lot on how metadata is displayed on file pages, and in a lot of ways, it still hasn't changed much since I did that. So success, right?
Yeah, sure. So the code you created for that project is still in core MediaWiki?
Yeah, there's some talk of some of it being split out into a library. Kind of no one has gotten around to doing that, but yeah, the code is mostly still there, for the most part untouched, which either I did a good job or the code was so terrible nobody wants to touch it again. Hard to know which.
I'm guessing the former, but
I don't know. It might be the latter.
So you now work for the Wikimedia Foundation. When did you start working there, and how did you get from a volunteer to a staff member?
So originally, I worked on the multimedia team. At the time, I was also liked Commons quite a lot, and I felt Commons was kind of underserved, and Wikimedia Commons, that is, where we put all our images. I felt they were kind of underserved with tools for managing a giant image database. In many ways, they still are. At the time, I think I'm not sure, but I think one of the things that helped was there was a kind of complicated bug around how when you upload a new image, the old versions of the images, I should say, have to be purged from cache, right? There was a complicated bug around cache purging where it was intermittently not working that I helped to figure out. And I think that was one of the things that kind of helped me possibly get hired. I'm not sure. Maybe that was just a coincidence, but around that time, helped debug the bug. I got an email from Rabla, I believe, and I had an interview, and it went well. So that's kind of how I got into the multimedia team. I worked on that for a little bit. This was when it was kind of first formed as an offshoot of what was then the platform team. And then I can't remember how long I worked on that. I think it was about a year, maybe more. And then I believe, was I still in university then? I worked from June 2013 to August 2013 on that team, and then took a break, and then kind of worked next year, May 2014 to November 2014 on that team. And a lot of it was, at the time, there was quite a lot of users on Commons who were unhappy with some bugs that were affecting Commons. So my kind of job was to work on the kind of bug of the day so that some of the other developers on that team could work on longer projects without constantly being distracted. For example, Media Viewer was just started to be worked on around that time. And then in November 2014, I took a little break. And then about a year later, I started working for the security team.
Going back just briefly to the Google Summer of Code thing, the whole point of the program is to bring in new people to open source projects, and I did a little research. You're actually one of very few people for whom the project fully worked as advertised or as desired. In that you actually now work for the Wikimedia Foundation. I think you're one of only two people who really got their introduction to MediaWiki via Google Summer of Code, who now work for the Wikimedia Foundation. The other one is a lawyer, so I'm not even sure if that counts for the purposes.
Stephen McCourt?
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, okay, yeah, sure. I just mean, I'm not sure if it counts as far as the original
developer,
goals of... Right.
There are other people who did Google Summer of Code that ended up getting hired. I think UV Panda did in later years, I think UV Panda did a project. Who else? Not currently working for the foundation, but I'm not sure I pronounce his name. Yaron something works for Wikimedia Deutschland?
Sure. No, there are a few. I think that there's around 7 people altogether who can be classified as successes, success cases. Yaron, whom you mentioned, is one of them. He was actually a student of mine in Google Summer of Code, so I'm proud of that. Just in terms of your experience, I know you can't really speak to other people's experiences, but do you have any thoughts on how your Google Summer of Code experience convinced you to keep working on MediaWiki?
Well, it certainly was a positive experience, but honestly, even without that experience, I'm not sure I would have really done anything different.
That's interesting.
I feel as kind of I'd already been kind of slightly obsessed with MediaWiki at the time. But it was certainly, I don't know, I guess Google Summer of Code really kind of forced me to understand the code base and actually do things. In many ways, it was my first real experience working on a complex code base, because it's a lot different to work on a complex existing code base than your own project or a school assignment and whatnot. In a big, complex open source project like MediaWiki, there's a lot of complicated code you have to understand to make your own code work. Right. And Google Summer of Code was the first time I really had to understand the complexities. Kind of turned me into a real programmer from someone who just sort of knew how to code in a beginner way.
Right. Well, very good then. So you now work in the security group. How much of your job right now is manually checking code for security leaks versus working on automated tools to do security checking versus just standard development?
Well, honestly, I don't do very much standard development anymore. It can vary quite a bit, depending on how many people need. At Wikimedia, anytime we enable a new extension, it's supposed to be security audited before we enable it. So sometimes a lot of teams all finish their extension at the same time. They're trying to get it done before the end of the quarter or whatever, or the end of the year. And we have a huge backlog of things to review. And then other times it's really quiet and we can work on other stuff. I would say something about 30 or 40% of my time is done checking other code. And then in addition to checking extensions that need to be checked, we also, from time to time, just re-audit random parts of our code to see if there's anything we missed or whatever. Recently, I've been working a bit on automated tools. That's kind of a new thing I've been doing.
I see.
We have this plugin to Phan we're working on that can detect certain types of vulnerabilities, which I'm very excited about. And then actual developer work, that kind of depends. Sometimes we fix things directly, but often we're more kind of an advisory role where we tell the developer responsible for the code to fix it, as opposed to fixing it ourselves.
Let's talk about MediaWiki. I don't know how well you know other software projects, but what's your sense of the strength of MediaWiki's security compared to that of other web applications, open source or otherwise?
Well, there's a wide gamut of software out there that has different attention to security. I think MediaWiki is very good on the more severe issues, like remote code execution. Vulnerabilities are very rare in MediaWiki, and so are SQL injections, which, as far as security vulnerabilities in web applications go, are kind of the more scary ones.
Right.
We have a slightly worse track record with cross-site scripting, and some of the design decisions make it kind of more difficult to secure against that, because we have the design decision where administrators can add arbitrary JavaScript. So that kind of makes it, well, I suppose the administrators are considered part of the trusted, so that's not really a security thing. If they screw up, that's like giving the wrong users trust. But nonetheless, that design decision kind of is a little bit more scary from a JavaScript security perspective.
Yeah.
We also we don't have, some software has a feature where you could have one-click upgrades, which is very convenient to users, but often those types of features make it much more likely to have vulnerabilities, because that means that the software has to be able to upgrade itself, which potentially means that someone can make it upgrade to the wrong thing, or at the very least, the software has to have write access to itself, which is kind of bad security practice. So the fact we don't have that feature is kind of helps us security-wise, but it's also kind of inconvenient to the users.
Well, that's interesting, because in just the last episode of this podcast, an interview I had with a consultant, a MediaWiki consultant named Bernard Krabina, he specifically said that an extension installer page in MediaWiki where you just see a bunch of extension names and you can press a button for each one to install it would be the number one desired feature for MediaWiki, and I've heard that from a lot of other people. Do you think it's possible to do that sort of thing in a fully secure way?
It increases the risk, but sometimes the risk might be worth it, right? Because at the end of the day, if we just turned off all the computers, we would have no security issues, but that wouldn't be very useful. So it's all about cost versus benefit. When you have a feature like that, it means that the MediaWiki itself has to be able to install extensions, so you don't get kind of the privilege separation, where in the current system, to install an extension, you usually have to SSH or at least FTP into your server and install the extension. Like, the web server itself doesn't have the ability, so if someone figures out something to bypass in the website, they can't do anything with it because the website just simply isn't able to do anything.
Right.
So it's all cost versus benefits, but for many users, the cost may be worth it. And other users like Wikipedia, the cost would not be worth it.
Right, that makes sense. I feel like we need to talk, again on the security note, about an incident a few weeks ago where an administrator for the Farsi language Wikipedia, or Persian language, added in site-wide JavaScript to do cryptocurrency mining. I don't know if it was Bitcoin or something else. It only lasted about 10 minutes before the edit was reverted, from what I understand, and the
I believe 7 minutes.
Oh, 7 minutes. Okay, great. I assume that administrator has been blocked for life, but it.
Yes, anyone who adds malicious JavaScript, you are blocked for life across all projects. End of story. It's a violation of the terms of service of Wikipedia to do that sort of thing, and we take it very seriously. Sure.
Still, it provoked a lot of discussion after it happened, even though it was in the grand scheme a pretty minor incident, given how short it was. But in your opinion, how big a threat is that kind of thing?
Well, it's definitely a risk, and we're currently looking into how to mitigate that risk. There's a lot of kind of discussions going on behind the scenes on what we should do about it. In fact, I have a meeting directly after this to talk about that. But yeah, so it's a risk when we let users add JavaScript to pages. It's also like a benefit because it acts as almost a release valve when the Wikimedia Foundation is not being upfront enough with developing features for people. They can, if it annoys them enough, they can kind of develop JavaScript themselves to fix it. But ultimately, it's quite a big security risk to allow random users on the internet to add JavaScript to our sites. In the future, we're probably going to mitigate with content security policy a bit, but that doesn't stem the entire issue. We're kind of still discussing what we should do about it internally.
Yeah, okay. Another security-related issue, although it's not as major as hacking database, is read access control. That issue always seems to come up when people talk about enterprise MediaWiki, within organizations and so forth. People usually say access control, but really they're almost always talking about read access, since write access is pretty doable, and it's not really that big a deal in wikis. I mean, I always personally recommend people use an extension like Approved Revs, which has monitored editing instead of just blocking off editing entirely. But anyway, the MediaWiki website makes a big deal about how read access is not foolproof, and there are all sorts of ways to see texts that people are not supposed to. The workaround that people usually end up doing is just creating a separate wiki for each set of private data. That can lead to an explosion of wikis, but personally I think it's a good solution because it's the safest one.
Yeah.
The thinking is that even if all the software worked perfectly as far as keeping people out, there's still so many ways that people could end up seeing content that they're not supposed to due to wiki configuration or user error, if nothing else. So the best approach might be the simplest one, which is to say if there's some information on a wiki that you're not supposed to see, then you shouldn't be able to get into that wiki in the first place. But maybe that's too draconian, to use your words, and puts MediaWiki at a disadvantage compared to other knowledge management systems. What do you think?
Yeah, so excuse me. In the Wikipedia context, of course, this is like not something that's important, and I think that's why we're very weak on it. In Wikipedia, everyone can view everything, and that's like the way it should be and the way it's designed to be. So the reason why we usually talk about read access when we're talking about access control is because other sorts of access control is implemented very well. In Wikipedia, Wikipedia users need to protect pages and do lots of things for editing access and other types of access. So that's been worked out. With read access, since Wikipedia doesn't really need to do it, there's been a lot of kind of hacks put in place for better performance that assumes that basically there's only one group who can read everything equally. When it comes to how we cache and render pages, the cache is shared amongst multiple users, and it doesn't keep track of if all of them are allowed to view it versus if everyone in the wiki is allowed to view it.
Right.
So work would need to be done in order to make MediaWiki treat read access as a first-class citizen. And maybe that's something we should do, but I don't think it's a very high priority for the Wikimedia Foundation, given Wikipedia doesn't need it. In terms of the best approach, separate wikis, ideally separate wikis on separate subdomains, because if you have, it depends a little bit if you have enabled the site JavaScript and user JavaScript features of MediaWiki. I believe site JavaScript is on by default, but user JavaScript is not. If you do that, like an administrator at the public wiki could add some malicious JavaScript to it, and if the private wiki is not in a different domain, that JavaScript could potentially read from the private wiki when being run by a user who has an account on both. So for best security on the two separate wiki front, it should really be separate subdomains in addition to just separate wikis. But yeah, that's the best solution so far, and maybe one day we'll be better at doing write access control in MediaWiki.
Yeah, read access control.
Read access, sorry, right.
Yeah, okay. So that's interesting. I mean, it's sort of both a technical question and a bigger question, which I guess is still technical, but because part of my thinking is even if read access control were perfect, and it would be better if it were to the extent possible, it still might be too big of a risk to have both accessible and inaccessible content on the same wiki, just because there can be bad configurations and so forth.
Yeah.
I don't know if you think about that kind of softer kind of issue.
Well, when it comes to security issues, it's usually because somebody screwed up, right? At the end of the day, somewhere, and misconfiguration is a really common way to screw things up. So yeah, in terms of that, it is also more secure if you have separate wikis where you're less likely to mix up the configuration between the two. And with separate wikis also, you could more easily put them in separate databases with separate database users that aren't allowed to read the other database users' data. So even if MediaWiki is totally compromised, the sites are still isolated. So there is quite a lot of benefits to making it totally isolated MediaWiki installs. Like, depends how far you want to go in the grand scheme of things. If your data is really, really sensitive, maybe you want it on entirely different systems, right? So that no matter what happens, they're still isolated. Of course, it's possible to go crazy doing that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly an argument for having some information not on a computer at all, but that's actually that's pretty good argument in some cases. So not to beat the subject into the ground, but one more related question: is there? I thought I read that there was some ongoing project to improve, at least the weaknesses in MediaWiki, as far as search and transclusion and that sort of thing for read access.
There's no active project right now. We've been kind of thinking about maybe looking into it, but it's kind of low on the priority list. Nothing yet, maybe one day kind of thing. It is something that's thought about, though.
Okay. On a separate subject, you just attended the Enterprise MediaWiki conference in Houston, and actually you were one of 6 people there from the Wikimedia Foundation, which I was very pleasantly surprised to see. And that includes the CTO of the Wikimedia Foundation, Victoria Coleman, who was there, if only briefly. Obviously, the Wikimedia Foundation has always supported MediaWiki and the enterprise to some extent, but this seemed to be an extra level of commitment, or at least interest. Why did you personally want to attend?
Well, I actually went last year to it as well and really enjoyed myself. So that was part of the reason. I kind of, it's interesting to see kind of the other side of things. I hear about Wikipedia so often. It's nice to hear about what other people are doing. There was a bunch of people from NASA at this event, and it's cool to see NASA using MediaWiki. I don't know, it's just quite fascinating to hear what other people are doing. I also kind of wanted to, make MediaWiki security stuff kind of be known to a wider audience. It's kind of good just to get the name out, because if third-party users come across a security issue in MediaWiki, we want to make sure they report it. And I was hoping that by kind of showing up, they kind of will think about us if they come across anything sketchy in MediaWiki, because nobody can catch everything, and the more people looking, the better. Sure.
Well, I guess there's 2 aspects to that. There's, catching security issues in, official code, and then thinking more about security issues when designing one's own extensions.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, you've certainly helped me a lot with that in my own extensions, and I shudder to think about the kind of stuff I was doing at the very beginning when I first created page forms, then known as semantic forms, and some of my other extensions. How
as do we all.
Yeah, okay.
I shudder to think about my early code too.
Oh, okay. Oh, I thought you were talking about mine. Yeah, okay, right. Same thing. Well, I mean, yeah,
No, I didn't mean it like that.
Oh, yeah, no, but I mean, you just if you just want to have a form there for people to enter data, and so who's going to think about escaping all the values and all that?
Yeah.
Finally, you got some positive press about 6 months ago in the Russian Republic of Bashkortostan because you fixed the alphabetical sorting in the Bashkir language Wikipedia.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, it's interesting how it's always the smallest things you do that people seem to care about the most. That was, I believe Amir had asked me to look into it, and it was like a very small thing to fix, but people were really happy about it. So yeah, so Bashkir, from what I understand, is a language used in a specific part of Russia. It's relatively small. And their sort order for the Cyrillic letters is different from the Russian one, like for when we display an alphabetical list on a category.
Right.
So I improved the code of MediaWiki to sort that language the right way, and they seemed very happy with it. They wrote an article about me in Bashkir language newspaper, which was an interesting feeling. I don't know. It was quite exciting. I printed it out and showed it to like my parents. Is like, oh, look at this! I'm famous in Russia.
Right.
I don't know. It's very exciting and kind of cool. But yeah, all in all, though, it was a very like minor change that really anyone could have done, and it always to me at least seems to be like the small things people care about. As opposed to the big things.
That is often true, yeah. Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much, Brian. This has been very educational, and it was great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, this has been another episode of Between the Brackets. I want to again thank my guest, Brian Wolff. If you notice a higher audio quality on my end, that's because I'm now using an actual microphone. It's a Blue Yeti microphone, if you're wondering. I want to thank Peter Woodsma, or Peter Woudsma, if you prefer, for the recommendation. See you next time.